All right, we're back, and it is COMP1004. That's Rapid Application Development here at Georgian College, and it's the fall 2016 semester. It's week 2, part 1 of our broadcast, and I really want to cover assignment 1, which should be available to now up on Blackboard, right? So if you guys go up on Blackboard, you can look at it. The assignment is very basic, right? But it's going to give you some practice. Very simple Windows application. That's what we're doing here this semester, right? So if I go into the assignment for a second, it's called the Sharp Mail Order, right? And it's actually an old assignment that I've been doing for years when it comes to this kind of stuff, UI development. So right now we're sitting at class 2. This is due class 4 or week 4. It won't be due on the Thursday. So we get together on Thursdays, 4 to 7. Friday at midnight. So I'll give you an extra day. So on the day or the week that it's due, if you still have problems, you want to make any tweaks, bring it into class, talk about it, so I can help you with the tweaks so that you get really, kind of marks. This is worth 10% of your final mark, and there's 27 points that I'm looking at overall, like you normally. Each of the things I'm going to be asking you to do are divided into a section, so section 1, and then a bunch of things you need to do for section 1. An example is your Windows form application will include the following components, and then blah, blah. And I've even given you an example of what it should look like, right? So it's something like this, right? Very basic. This is your final form sample that you're going to be doing. There's a print button, and in past iterations, we had a print function that we're making work. I'm going to ask you not to do a print preview. We're going to be doing just a message box that comes up and says, your form is being printed. And there's a reason for that, because we don't have the same we used to have. They don't apply anymore. And doing printing is actually quite hard, believe it or not. It's there's a whole graphic aspect to creating the print preview and so on. And so we're going to do that later on. When we hit printing, it'll be far after. But I want you to put the buttons in place. The UI elements is what I want you to focus on in this one. This is just getting used to the UI application that does some calculations, right? That's what it's all about. Remember, this course is an intro course, intro to UI development, if you will. But it also cuts and hits I've already talked about, like object-oriented programming techniques, event handling, those kind of things. All those kind of topics are going to be covered again. Right, so this is what you're building, and there's details of how to build everything. Basically, if you look at the description, and I want to go into too much detail here because it's not that exciting, but what you're going to be doing is you're going to be kind of thinking about what the sales bonus is going to be based on the hours worked every week, right? So if you think about it, the company has instituted a bonus program to give its employees an incentive to sell more. For every $1 the store makes in a 4-week period, so again, 4 times 4, 16, so 40-hour weeks. As an example, if someone works a 40-hour week and they work 4 weeks, that's 160 hours, right? The employees receive 2% of sales based on the number of hours they've worked. So then, if I worked 100 out of 160 hours, I get 2% of sales times the percentage of hours that I've worked over 160 hours. That's it, really. It's not that difficult in terms of calculations. The challenge here is going to be, how do I get data from the application, right? Doesn't matter whether you're doing rapid application development with C#, with JavaScript, with Swift and iOS, with Android, whatever, right? Everything that you get from the UI, at least at this current date in 2016, right? You get string input. So you have to convert from string to whatever the data type is when you do your calculations. All right, so that's the first thing. So the user would enter some data into something that you can use, right? The other thing consideration you should think about, which I'm going to be testing, and this is outside of some of the scope of what I'm asking, is, can I break your program, right? Like, what if I enter an A instead of a number, a symbol? How can you test for that? And we're going to be talking about that over the next couple of weeks, about how to make your program, at least you can validate your input for the user. How do I validate user input? But on the back end, we have this fantastic programming language, C#, that helps us do all that, right? So I want you to think about how to do that. And there's going to be some that as we go through the lessons. Remember that we're covering 2 chapters a week. So this week we're covering from the book, which is really, again, introductory chapters on UI development and some C# code. Now, you've done Java, but you may have not done C#, which is okay. So we're just going to, I'm always going to relate what it looks like on Java to C# to give you an idea of how to progress. Because, you know, you've done Java, and some people have done JavaScript with me as well. C influence language, some of the structures, like I said last week, are the exact same, right? And there's shortcut keys we're going to be talking about, shortcuts to the whole application framework that you can use to make your workflow a little bit more efficient. Okay. One is the form itself. One part, how to add different things. And I've asked you to do things like add text fields. And I say, I don't tell you how many to add. I say add text fields and associated labels to them for employee name, employee ID, and so on. That means you have freedom to do your UI, so it doesn't have to necessarily look like this. I'm just giving you an example if you just have no clue where to start, right? Here's an example of maybe something that it might look like, right? You don't have to make it look like this. You can make it look like something that works for you. Obviously, you don't want to make it so that it's full screen. That would be very bad, right? Because we don't have a lot of fields, and full screen would waste a lot of time. I'll give you some clues about, again, what to do, what not to do as we go forward. So that's one part. One part is building the UI and functionality behind it. So one part you're going to get is UI marks. You might have something that's more UI intensive, user interface intensive. So you'll have things like add text fields, but that's all about UI, right? And there might be something like, well, the value for the total hours work field cannot exceed 160 hours. So if I put in something like more than 160 hours somehow, you know, and it says ensure that only valid data can be entered into this field. Example, no negative numbers. Seems like a lot for one mark, but remember, it's only out of 27, so each mark counts, right? Each point counts. There's other ways to do that. If I was thinking about data validation or input validation techniques, there's a couple things. I can make it so that it's a pull down. Remember, the less control the user has to enter data. So if I put, example, if I'm making a calculator application, and I allow the user to actually type in the data physically, like with his keyboard, he can type in whatever, right? Or she can type in whatever, and then there can be problems. What if the only way you can type in stuff in the application is actual number keys? That would limit the user for the input type. So there's different techniques we can use to stop that from happening. And an example here for 160 hours is maybe it's a pull down where they have to physically pull the number, and then you assign a default number. Like for example, maybe the average person worked only 80-hour work week because most people are part-time. So maybe you pull down that goes from 1 to 160 if it's even hours. I'm just assuming. And then what you do is you sit there and go, okay, it's 81 hours. And maybe if you want to have half hours or quarters, you can have another control that says 0.5, right? So you don't allow the user to physically enter the data. I'm just giving you some ideas of what can happen. It may not work. It may not even be, for every control. But think about ways of limiting user input, because the more you do that, the less chance there's going to be for someone to break your code. The more opportunities I have to enter whatever data I want, the more chances I can break your code, because I can enter whatever I want. Data input validation. We're going to talk about techniques. There's also things like using regular expressions. We can do that. We can also limit the field in terms of what can be entered into the field. It'll give you, there's some validation controls we can add into our form as well. There's lots of ways of doing this thing, and it's just picking the most appropriate way to pain in the ass to code. Okay, so your total sales field should display a value using standard currency format. Example, $4,536.74 with a $sign in front of it, right? Ensure that only valid data can be entered this field, right? So when you're entering data, and that will be more difficult to validate, because, you know, how are you going to enter in like you're going to have a pull down for dollars? It's too much. That way, this field probably you're going to have an entry. Enter in a piece of some sales figure, whatever it's going to be, right? We have to talk about that. We're going to talk about group boxes and radio buttons. What those do is that this whole form can get translated in both English and French. But what if you're not a French guy or girl, right? Google Translate, it's okay for this application. It's not perfect, or girl, I apologize in advance because some of it may not be 100%, right? And I will give a bonus for people who want to make it in other languages. Like, for example, I do French. I've only asked for French and English, but let's say you want to do it also in Spanish for whatever reason. Or in Ukrainian, because you're a Ukrainian guy or girl. I'm going to give you a bonus if you add other things. It's up to you. Remember, the things that I've put up here for my requirements are the minimum requirements, what I'm asking you to do, right? If you add additional things and you let me know about them, I have no problem with that. Okay, a picture box on the form that creates a simple logo. Okay, what about if you don't know how to make a logo? This is a logo for your application, which is going to be called the Sharp mail order thing, right? You can make a logo for the company, a faux logo. And I've kind of given you an example of something that was created before, which is basically just a V with some text in there and some kind of thing in the background. And you can use, like I said, Fireworks or Illustrator or Photoshop or whatever you want, whatever you GIMP, lots of free tools out to create some kind of, you're getting paid for it. So it's not a lot, it's 1 mark, but you're still getting paid to do something. Calculate buttons, next buttons, and print buttons. Those are just buttons that you're going to kind of put on the form. Functionality. The calculate button will determine the sales bonus earned by the employee, and the calculate button will only work if valid data is entered. I keep on saying that over and over again, so I think there's a really good example of, or good impetus, if you will, to validate user input, right? That's part of our application, and I need to tell you how to do that, right? So over this week and next week, input validation techniques and exception handling. All right, so I'm going to click the next button, which will clear the text property for the employee name, employee ID, and so on. You're kind of simulating what it's like to enter another piece of data for another employee. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm not asking you to remember the data from the previous entered employee, because that would require a database connection, right? Or some kind of other methodology, like creating classes and objects and so on. At this point, I don't care about. All you're doing is simulating what it would be like to go to the employee. Structure, that's the next piece. So one part is UI, the next part is, for 3 marks, is solution structure. So I want you to structure a solution that says, so the form is called the mailorder.cs. That's the form name, okay? I want that. Everyone should have the same name. The Windows form and all attached UI controls must have appropriate variable names with the following format: control name, whatever the control name is called, me, and then the UI control type, for example, button, click me button, in all upper camel case, like calculate BMI button as an example. Ensure all private class members and variables, or instance variables, if you will, use an underscore, this underscore, to denote that it's private, right? Because everyone should have the same style. In the book, it tells you can use short forms for your controls, like LBL for label and BTN for button. But in my, my coding shop, you guys are all part of my same coding shop, we're playing this little simulation, I don't want that. The manager says that it's got to be button and label, like the full name of your control. Not because I want to make you crazy with the full names of the controls, but only because I want you to practice so you understand what you're doing. You have to name things appropriately. Internal documentation, please put things like your comment headers and your C# files, the app name, the author's name, the app creation date, app description. Probably your student ID would be good too. I didn't put that in here, but you probably should put that in there. Yes.
Compared to something like Java, how much self-commentation?
0, unless you tell it to, right? You can set it up so that it gives you some comments. There are ways of, when you start commenting, like if you start the commenting style, it'll actually fill it in for you, right? There are, if you set up a new file, a new class, or whatever, it doesn't give you anything. Like, for example, in Java, it gives you the whole comments, the stubs, and everything else. It doesn't give you that in this at all, right? So Contextual variable names, inline comments. Don't kill it with inline comments. Don't tell me every line of what it does. Like, it has to be reasonable. So when you go through your comments, comment stuff that needs to be commented. If the code doesn't, some people say, well, the code should comment itself. Well, yeah, yes and no. Sometimes it does, and nowadays it does. Sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes you need to kind of describe what you're doing with the code. Now, this is such a simple application that you're building. You probably shouldn't need a lot of inline comments unless you're doing something special. Yes. That's almost what he said. The answer is yes. No, I'm not saying negative. I'm saying it's kind of, they're related, your questions. And JSDoc exists for JavaScript, for Java. And there is a coding style. We use actually an XML style for C#, right? So for Visual Studio, and we'll talk about that in a second. // If you ever try going / on top of a method, it'll actually start the whole documentation. But it doesn't happen automatically. The great thing about it is if you if you add documentation like comments, comment headers, and we'll talk about style for comment headers. There's a couple ways to do it. New class, like I kind of showed you this last time. What it'll do is it'll pull up information about your custom class. Class example, last week we did the person class. What it requires a name and an age. It'll tell you that stuff, name and the age, person class. And the more information you put in for your constructor and all the other stuff, it'll give you code hinting for that too, if you put it in your comments. So comments can actually give you IntelliSense, which is a really good, it's just like JavaDoc does. Or UEDoc, if you're someone who likes JavaScript. Okay, so inline internal documentation, GitHub. 4 marks. So 2 marks just to plop your stuff on GitHub and say goodbye as a backup. And you'll automatically lose 2 marks if you just do that. Or if you work with GitHub as you go, you'll get your full 4 marks, which means that if you, as you develop, if you continue to push everything up to GitHub, when you add a new feature, then you'll get your full marks for GitHub. Okay. There's also opportunities for bonus marks. I've put a bit of a rubric inside the bottom of the assignment documentation. It also exists online. So if you actually go up on Blackboard, you'll see the rubric is attached to the assignment. So there's an actual digital rubric that'll tell you where all the marks come from. All right, so 27 marks, 8 for UI, 7 for functionality. So it's kind of balanced there. 3 and 5 respectively for program structure and internal documentation, and then 4 for version control. So if you think about all the non-programming stuff, 3 and 5, 8 and 4 is kind of 12 out of 27. It's almost like you're passed and you haven't done any code, right? Difficult. This is not a difficult assignment. That's why it's only worth 10%. It's your intro into doing something to build your first application for Windows Forms. Don't wait until the last minute to do this. It just won't bode well for anybody. I don't want to get questions at the very last minute on Slack saying, Tom, I've just started building my application and it's messing up. And it's like, Thursday night, right, of the week that it's due. After we've talked, you started building it right then. Start today. You can finish. And you know what? Here's another thing. I'm not responsible for Blackboard going down. All right. Some people have said something like this. They're like, Blackboard went down. I was putting up the app and it was like, is it okay? 1201? Are you going to give me are you going to take off marks from 1201? It's not my fault because Blackboard went down. Blackboard's not my fault either, right? If you please submit and submit often. All right. That's a really good policy. So it's okay if you kind of put up your first iteration of your app and you're like, about something else I want to add in. Okay, let me add something else to my app. Let's add something else. If you submit a bunch of times, it's okay. I'm going to take your final submission, right? But if you submit at the last minute and somehow it breaks, right? That's not my fault, guys. Right? It's your responsibility. Yeah.
So you set this assignment up for multiple
unlimited submissions. Please allow yourself to do that. So you can submit many times, right? I'm only going to look at the last one. So if you forgot something, like you forgot your GitHub link, all right, don't send me an email saying, Tom, here's my email for my GitHub link. I'm not going to look at that, right? There's just too many things to look at. So please don't do it that way. All right, so I'll be honest with you, at the university level, they don't accept any late assignments. Zero. For most times, you submit an assignment late in university, 0. I have that policy here because we're not at university, we're a college, right? And I want I want to make it a friendly environment so you guys can all learn. But the first day late, if you're late the first day, it's 20%, guys. because I want to be a hard ass. It's not about that at all. It's just that I got lots of stuff going on, right? And so do you guys. So if you get in early, I'm going to try and mark it on time. And what happens is, and this is traditional, every semester what happens starts happening for you guys because everything is due at the same time. So in 2 weeks from now, you're probably going to get 4 other assignments, whatever it's going to be, right? And mine is going to go at the bottom of the bucket, start and finish. You can get this thing done in 2 hours, the whole thing, right? This is not a large assignment, right? So get mine done first, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. And I'll mark everybody, we'll be on time and on track. 8, it just leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Sure, you're late and you lose 2% right off the top. Why would you want to do that? You guys submit a bunch of times and you all get bonus marks, right? So you get over 100%. I'll give you guys over 100%. I don't mind. Questions around this stuff? Very easy assignment, very straightforward. UI creation with Visual Studio and C#. That's really what you're doing here, outside of the ordinary. The next one, as we go on, it's going to progressively get more difficult. And I want to do, I'll tell you right now, by your midterm, there's going to be you're going to have to actually create something on your midterm. Now with these little silly assignments, and by the midterm, you're going to, even if I give you 10 hours, you won't be able to finish it. Because even if I give you, it's completely open book. I was going to say open source. Open book and open internet and all that stuff. It doesn't matter. There's just too much to do, and it's detailed like this. Imagine if I give you this document like this on the exam. This could be something you could do in an exam because it's only worth 10%, and there's not a lot of points I'm looking at to do though. Because I'll tell you why. You got to test it. There's validation involved. You're going to make mistakes. Something's not going to work properly. In front of you may mess up. There's lots of possibility for failure. And if you haven't done it before, it's multiply that by 2 in terms of things you don't know what to do. You don't know where to look. You don't know how to do stuff. So please, please practice. Don't just watch the videos. Don't just watch me with what I'm doing. Get your hands dirty and get to it, right? I know some people don't like doing their own work, and they pay other people to get their work done too. It happens at college and university, right? That would be very bad in a hands-on course like this. That would just screw you from an assignment perspective or from an exam perspective. Yeah, I got to be cheery about this too. Sorry, I don't want to be doom and gloom. Any other questions around this thing? Because no one asked anything. You guys are great. You guys know everything, and your UI is going to be fantastic, right? All right, let's get to it. So that's this part. What was that? Well, you could certainly work on it today if you want, but I'm going to be working on this. I've got to show you how to do everything, right? So if you want to use this class time for that, I have no problem. I'm not going to stop you. If you want to play games in the class too, I'm not going to stop you, right? If you want to take phone calls in the class, right? As long as you're really, really quiet and you're not loud, like some of those guys in New York. Yeah, I hear you. If you don't like that, I'm okay with it. Keep it low. I'm all right, right? You want to eat in the class? You want to eat in the class? Eat in the class. You want to spill stuff on your machine? Do it, right? It's not my thing. As long as you don't destroy anybody else's stuff, I'm okay. You can bring food. It's 4 to 7. A lot of the time we have dinner around the same time, 4 to 7. So it's okay to eat, and it's okay. Like I don't want to make this class like really crazy. Like you're like, oh my God, if I'm not there on time, then I'm going to miss something really critical or whatever. That's why I'm recording everything. I want to make it a kind of a light environment, so it's not so bad. But there are some things we need to learn, and I got to cover those things. All right, so if I look at the PowerPoint to keep us on track, what we're talking about today is how to design a Windows Form application. There's 2 parts. These are up on, and the second part is how to code and test a Windows application. When I say test, this is bad. The testing thing. When we talk about testing, some people think about not doing unit testing right now. Later on in the course, and we can do unit testing. Unit testing is actually a very modern approach to creating code and so on, especially if you're doing test-driven development. Right now, testing means how do I debug? How do I debug my code? So we're going to be talking about that today as well. So I want to break it. I want to make something, break it. How do I fix it? And I want you guys to help me with the answers. All right. So we're going to be talking about those things. So there's not a lot of slides here. It gives you the basis of what we're talking about. The book, like I said, it's Murex, Visual Studio 2015. book, this latest book, and it's up on the. I'll put up the outline, the syllabus later on today. Okay. So, and I'm going to use Windows. I'm going to create Windows. Last time I did an external hard drive. Today I'm just going to use my hard drive here on my Mac. There's many ways to do this. Again, I'm going to use VMware Fusion for those Mac people, and I'm going to run my Windows 10 VM. Last time I did the boot camp for boot camp, and that's how I did it, right? If you're a Mac user and you have extra space on your machine, you can certainly do a boot camp. However, I don't recommend it. And I don't recommend it for a couple of reasons. One, it takes up quite a bit of space, and unless you have a lot of space on your Mac, you need about 150 gigs properly. Why? It's going to fill up. Visual Studio is a pig, and when we do installations with Visual Studio, what happens is slowly, it continues to fill up, and Windows 10, especially with all its updates and everything else, it keeps on growing and growing and growing. So my image keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I need at least, first it was 100, then I went to 150, and now my image is about 250 gigs, right? It's not because I want it to be that way, I swear. I haven't installed a damn thing on this thing. It just keeps going bigger and bigger. I don't know what it is, right? Anyways, let us kick off our Visual Studio 2015. Again, this is slightly different than we did last time because I'm using the machine's hard drive as opposed to mine. The great thing is I can still do this. I can keep going back from Windows to Mac. And the Mac side, I'm just going to use it for any PowerPoints I'm going to pull up. So an example is just to keep us on track. That's what I'm using the PowerPoints for. And the first topic, again, is how to design a form. And we talked about this last time. One of the form examples that they came up with in the book is how do I make this invoice idea, right? This is part of our example in class today. So I'm going to kind of make this really, really big. You can do the same thing for yourself if you look up online with Blackboard. I want to build this form with you today, all right, as an example. And it sounds like a little small form, but there's actually quite a little bit of detail here, right? Believe it or not. And this is kind of stepping you into getting your assignment going. So if you want to start building your assignment with the same stuff we're doing, requirements in the assignment, and start laying it out. It's okay if you wanted to do that. And I fully encourage that kind of stuff. Okay, so I want to build this format. And it looks like I have a bunch of labels, a text box, and some read-only text boxes here. And I've got some buttons, calculate button and an exit button here. We're going to talk about those. We kind of did this last time, so it's a bit of a review. And then we'll get into some more detail afterwards. All right, so I'm just going to set this up a little bit differently. So I'm going to go into, I got a couple windows. So I'm just going to pull this over here so I can go from, so it's going to be Mac, or sorry, Windows and Mac. I'm going to make a new project, right? So let's do that together. So we're going to go new project. Do I have a, I don't have a folder for you. I'll make a new folder. So I'll browse, I'll go out to documents, and I'll make a new folder. Let's COMP1004. I had it on my other machine. There we go. And I'll select this folder. So this is where this is going to go. And we're going to call this COMP1004 Fall 2016. And it's lesson 2. Notice that I have application insights unchecked. Now, I don't need that because when I click on Visual C#, right, Windows form application, right, Windows form. So I click on Windows. That's the shortcut. This is just a list of stuff that I can do. We did a console application last week as well. I just want to do a simple Windows form application, Windows Forms. No, all these things go away. And to note is that I have included, I'm going to do GitHub again, which is right here. Now again, to have GitHub integration fully work on your machine, you need Visual Studio 2015 with Update 3 and the GitHub extension. Yes?
I do have Git installed. I don't have.
Click that button. Click that Add to Source Control, right? You know why? Once you do that the first time, you're going to be asked, there's going to be a little dialog that pops up that says, what do you want? Do you want Git or Team Explorer, like with Visual Studio Online? Which one do you want? Choose Git, and every time you choose Git, there's going to be another little check mark that says Alt Source Provider. That's the one you want to use. And then it'll, forever on after that, it'll say, create a new Git repository. So try it out. box after you're finished creating your application will come up that says, do you always want to use Git? And the answer is going to be, yes, I do, right? Okay, let's click OK. All right, so it's doing its deployment dance. It's gonna scaffold out my basic application architecture. Solution Explorer here. I have properties and references and app config. And for those people who've done the web, this is more like a configuration file. I like to say it's more like a manifest for my application. That's what my app config is. I've got my application called form1.cs, and because we're doing this invoice, the invoice total form, right? Just because we're doing this example, so I'm gonna kind of click in there and rename the form total form, right? Nice and long. And ask me if I want to propagate all my changes across my entire application, and the answer is, of course, yes, which means it's going to refactor all my classes that are related to this form in the background, right? If I click no, that would be very bad. It means I have to manually update everything on my own, which doesn't make any sense. And there you go. So we've got this form going right now. What I might want to switch resolutions in a second because it's kind of very hard to see. No, you're good? You only see this? You don't see anything else? Then you've chosen the wrong template, buddy. Go back and do it again. It's under Windows, right? So you've missed something, or something didn't fire correctly. All right. We also talked about last week as a review, because we talked about a bunch of things last week. Last week we talked about there's different windows in Visual Studio, right? One of them is, this is the Visual Designer right here. There's also Solution Explorer window here. Notice that we also have Microsoft's default menu up the top here for into the ID, and it's doing its little dance here. You know what this is? This is stuff that's happening in the background that takes 2 seconds for you guys on Windows and takes like 3 minutes for me on my virtual machine with it as it happens.
Tom, how do you get the properties to pop up? I checked under view.
I will. I'll give it a second. So I don't have my properties, which is this other window right here. Take a look. This is the window for my properties. If I pin it, right, the way to get that is if you go to View, and if you go Other Windows, or actually, sorry, at the bottom here where it says Properties window, and you can also select F4 window. All right, so down here in the bottom. There it is.
Gotcha. Okay.
All the windows that you see that I have up are all available through the View window. If something's missing, if there's a window that's missing, please go through the View menu to get all the other windows. There's a bunch of windows here. Other little panels that pop up. This is where you get them all. Menu. Okay, so we've got our window, our form, and I'm just, like I said, I want to switch resolutions for a second because I think it's a little bit too tight for me, and I want to make it so that we can see a little bit larger. And I'm going to kind of go up to another 125. All right, for me, so that you guys can see. Yes.
Good question. This is possibly really personal. Toolbox is on the left side of the screen, but that's also where the form is. Is there any way to move so I can actually?
You can drag and drop. You can tear away anything the way you want. If you notice, let's say for example, my toolbox here, I can tear it away, and I can put it where. See if as I move my window, see how these little controls are placed, like this and this. If I hover over any one of these places, like this, options to put my toolbox wherever I want. Does that make sense to you? Right? So I want to put it on this side because that's where I want to park it, but I don't want to pin it. If I pin it or unpin it, it'll actually be there. My toolbox right here, right? But it'll only pop in when I need it. Now, typically when I'm dragging and dropping, I want my toolbox to be pinned. Dragging and dropping into my form will lie underneath my toolbox, which is not conducive to me dragging and dropping, right? Also, if I pin it away, and if it's down here, if I don't want it there, and I want this thing to have a different order, that it always now is at the bottom because I've kind of ripped it away and put it back, right? So all windows on Visual Studio can be torn away pretty much and reordered the way you like, right? So you can create your own workspace and the way you like to work. okay? I fully encourage this because maybe the way I work is different than the way you work. You're used to another IDE, and that's okay. I'm not going to judge you on how you do your work, as long as you come up with the same work as that I've asked you.
Yeah, I'm only complaining because when I open it, it's like,
So because because you're saying it's not pinned, right? But if you click the pin button right here, right? Yeah, you could do it that way, or you just keep it pinned, like I said, and then when you drag a common control, like a label, right? And if I drag and drop, a couple ways to add stuff to the form, like this, right? I could do it that way. Here's ways of adding things, and this is right from your presentation. I could, right? Like this. Double click, and then my label is going to appear at the top left corner of my screen. As another thing you could do. Very effective. Although it does put other things. If I want to double click a bunch of stuff, they're all going to appear, you know, on the top left corner of my screen, and move things around afterwards. That might be your style of doing things. Me, I like to drag and drop, and you can also programmatically do things as well. However, I recommend that at the beginning don't do that, because your job becomes twice as difficult. Not because it's not a great way to do things. So I'm going to undo those things. And again, I'm pressing Control-Z to undo, just like normal. Okay, so I want to figure out this form a little bit. And if I was going to match up with what I have here, here's what my client has given me. Give me this little UI. It's a piece of crap, right? It's not really that interesting or even inventive. It's just using Windows forms. Bar says invoice total. So I want to change my title bar to invoice total. Where do I do that? Who remembers? Yeah. Properties of what? Of the form, right? So remember, the form itself is an object, right? Form is an object, and you've got your controls. Each object has properties, right? Form itself has properties. We talked about that last week. So a little bit of a review. If you go through here, you notice the text property of my form right now says form 1, and we want to put in there invoice total, I think. So invoice total. There we go. Okay, I got my invoice total, so that I met this piece. I want to put my, again, and I recommend this, before you do any functionality, your UI together, right? I fully recommend this, right? Because this way you've kind of put your UI together, and then you can figure out the functionality afterwards, right? If you start monkeying with everything at the same time, right? Miss something, and it's almost like you're going back and forth. I find that it's much faster to do your UI first and then add functionality after. So let's do this again. So subtotal, discount percent, discount amount, and total. So I'm going to add a bunch of labels, and I want them to line up. And we're going to talk about techniques. Notice that when I put my label up, when I drag and drop, I have these little magic, guides that come up, right? So smart guides. If I put it up here, it tells me that there's a default margin that's around the entire form. And all I'm doing is I'm dragging in a label at this point, right? So I want to put my label starting up right here for now, right? And my first label is subtotal, right? So I'm going to put in subtotal. Now, that if I double click on my label, I'm going to be able to modify the name, and that's not correct. Remember, we have to modify the text property of the label. I want to modify the name property. So the name property is very important because it tells C# how I can hook into that object on the code behind file that's related to this design file. So there's 3 states. There's the design state, this design form, code state, where I'm actually going to the programmatic side of things, right? Then there's the runtime. When I'm actually running, that's a state. I'm actually running the form, right? Instantiate everything, and it's fully working. Okay, so I want to change this label, and again, if it's called subtotal, I'm going to call it, what am I going to call the label? Subtotal label, right? I know I'm being a stickler for this, and I know it sounds really stupidly easy, but every semester when we teach this course, someone doesn't do it for whatever reason. They make their own. STL, LBL, they call it that, or something else. Adhere to my recommendations, and you won't lose any marks, right? you're gonna ask me, Tom, it's really pedantic what you're doing. You're making us, code our stuff in a certain way. Yeah. In the real world, they tell you exactly what to do. What they're asking you to do. Here's what the customer wants. Do what the customer wants. That's what your thing is. Guys, after you learn this, this is a viable skill. 80% of forms, Windows forms out there, or Windows applications in the real world use Windows forms, right? When you make stuff custom for in-house stuff. You might as well do what you're asked to do. So this would be called the total, right? Or subtotal label. Subtotal. Usually I cut it with every word, subtotal label. And I want to change the text property to subtotal. So subtotal. Walk through. Okay, cool. A little bit small. Notice that this, and my form is a lot bigger than my example, which means I have to resize my form in a bit. And I have my discount amount and total. So I need 3 more. Well, I've got this one. I might as well copy and paste. This is the other thing. So there's 3 ways you can add things to your, or labels or other controls to your form. The other way is double clicking, and it'll just put it on the top left corner of the form. And the third way is if you have already a label or some other kind of control you want, copy and paste. Do it. And there's, of course, there's also the programmatic way of doing it where you have no UI layout at all. All right, so copy, paste, and paste, and paste. I've got 3 of them. Line them up. And notice I have these smart guides that allow me to line up my label, below the other one. So I want to try and do that first. So here's my first one, here's my second one, and here's my third one. They all look the same right now because they say the same thing, and they're not really aligned properly or whatever. We're going to do that in a second, especially if there's something like this. Let's say they're out of alignment and up. If I have a lead one that's already been aligned, it's very simple. I click that one first with shift. So shift click each of these other ones, right? And notice that I have these alignment bars that come up on the top for the menu. I can certainly click this one, which is align lefts, and also pop, all of them are aligned immediately, right? With aligning from a top to bottom perspective, right? You can align it in line, and there's also, if you look at this one, so I want all the alignment to be the same. There's other ones here as well, like make same height if I want to. This one is make same size, right? This one here is make horizontal spacing equal. That's an important one. So I want all the horizontal spacing, instead of me doing it by eye and drag and dropping, I want it all equal. If I had one that was, if I had one that was like this, right, and the other ones were like this, and I just kind of dragged and dropped it, I could certainly click the first one, and then the next pieces like this. Oops, undo that one. And I want to make them equal. So if you notice, it's vertical spacing equal. I can do that, and now they're all equal. Yes. Right click on where? Up here. Right click on here. Okay, so if I click here, and if I shift click, or maybe someone else can help them next on the table, right? Can I get one of the guys to help them out? Thank you. All right, because we got to move on. I owe you, right? Okay, how about that? You're next. How about that? You're going to be the helper. Why don't you come over here? Come on over. Oh yeah, you asked for it, baby. Let's go, right? All right. No, and then I'll send you to help everybody else out. How about that, right? Of the team, queen of the team. There we go. Yeah, I don't mind that. I love being challenged, and I think it's a good challenge. I think you're worthy. If you're here and if you're a programming girl, I used to, and I actually had a lot of gaming classes, so I would call you a gaming girl in other contexts, right? Hey, let's play. I'm good for that. I'm good for that. No problem. But seriously, now if I go back, I've got my labels, right? And I apologize for any kind of misstep that I make, me being an old guy and all. I have to use that as an excuse once in a while, Keith. You know how it is. Discount percent, right, is the next one. So I want to rename this thing discount percent. And there's so discount percent. We have another problem here. We're going to see in a second. My label size is different, right? My label size is bigger than this one. We're just talking about UI. I've got my subtotal. I got to change my name too, but I'm going to change my text property first. Discount total, it's going to be total, right? Up as well. So here's total. That was a bad. Oh, what was that? You figured it out? All right, good. So this is going to be obviously my discount percent. Woo, label, massive, right? And this is going to be my discount amount label, right? Discount amount label, right? And this one down here is going to be the total label, right? Total label. Done, right? There we go. All the labels are done. They're all there. I got a problem. And the problem is that my labels are different sizes, right? So when it comes to, I've aligned them all left, right? And notice my example here, that's also aligned left. Hey, you might want it to align it right. It kind of looks weird like this, right? Different sizes and so on. And we'll talk about this UI, best way to make UI and all that kind of stuff later on. 4 text boxes, that's what these are, right? So it's going to be my subtotal text box, my discount percent text box, my discount amount text box, and my total text box. Please go ahead and do those without me waiting to do it with you, right? The text boxes are going to just leave them the way they are right now. And let's the read-only text boxes, we're going to change that later on. I want to put these 4 text boxes. So again, I would drag and drop a text box. I want to align it with the subtotal for now and kind of put it closer because that's what it looks like here on the diagram, right? So here's my first text box. And you want to align it so that it kind of hits the bottom. That bottom line, that red line that comes up, this one, bottoms, right? The baseline, if you will, for the text, right? So I want to do this first text box. Notice that it has a default size. And I'm just going to copy and paste the rest. So I'm going to copy this one, copy, paste, line it underneath, and line it so it kind of aligns both ways. There we go. See how that aligns both the top and the baseline, right? And then the next one, top and the baseline. Oops, there we are. And the next one, and the baseline. There we go. So now they're all aligned nicely. And then what I can do is I can name them properly. So this is the subtotal text box. One day when my Visual Studio response, there we go. Subtotal text box. I know you guys are going to say, wow, it's so wordy, Tom. Why would you make it so big? You'll see. Discount percent text box. And this is my discount amount. You don't want to definitely call them anything like, I never want to see label 1, label 2, label 3, label 4, or text box 1, 2, 3, 4. Please don't do that, right? That'd be very bad. And this one would be the total text box. Okay, good. So we have those. Boxes themselves right now are places where people or users can enter in data. Yes.
Sorry, if we were like, I mean, normally long story, but if we put like discount and percent sign and then text box.
Don't use a percent because think about the percent sign as part of our variable. We don't want a percent sign typically in a variable name. Okay, not that it's not. People haven't done it before. Discount dis per text box TB, right? That could be something that people do. But again, if you don't know what that is, if I'm picking up your code tomorrow and I don't know what it is, right? And you've programmed it and then I'm following you. I have no idea of what it means and how do I access it in a code behind file. Whereas if we all use the same best practice, if you will, the same conventions, right? Then I know I can pick up your work tomorrow with the same label and text and the same naming, right? Trust me, if you're ever in a company and you saw somebody deviate from that kind of thing, you'd be like, oh man, this guy doesn't even know what he's doing, right? You'd probably say something like that, even though it's silly, something silly like a variable name. I know it sounds silly, guys, but it's really not, right? Okay, let's take a look. I want to make these 3 read-only. So because they're the exact same, right, I'm going to kind of choose these things again. So 1, 2, 3, shift, 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 shift click. Now, there's going to be a read-only property down here, right? So if you notice read-only is false, I can change all of them all at the same time to true because that's a property of, but it looks pretty darn ugly. right? Because when you notice what happens in Windows 10, right? Remember, I'm using Windows 10, so it's going to take on the default system values for colors. If I was programming this on the Mac, by the way, and you can do that, I can use Windows Forms on the Mac by using Xamarin Studio, right? It would look totally different, and it would take the Mac colors for the system values are different, right? I want these to be the same, so it looks like this, but they're read-only, yeah. This? Hold on, I'll tell you how to get there. All you have to do is go back to your Solution Explorer and double-click. So if you go to your Solution Explorer, right, and you double-click on your invoice total form. All right, what's that? Read-only is a property that's further down. If it's notice that right here is you can also choose other ways of doing things. So you can say categorized, right? These two buttons allow you to organize your properties. And the read-only property will be under R, read-only. These three under text, make sure that you're clicking on your text box. It'll be like this, 1, 2, 3. And don't worry, I will go around during the break and I'll show you where everything is. So if I click these three, and if I'm clicking the property, then read-only is right here, the text box. It's not there? Okay, well, I'll show you. Anyone else have that problem? Everyone has, okay, everyone's, so you must be missing something. Make sure you're clicking on the right text boxes. Okay, so I want to change these things, right? Because they look pretty ugly, right? They're kind of grayed out kind of thing, right? Grayed out, it looks like this. So what can I do? I can go to shift click these three. So we give the illusion that it's the same. And we're going to click on the back color property where it says control. Instead of control, we're going to click it. We're going to change this property. A few tabs here. This custom, web, and system. Take a look, right? Custom, web, and system. We're going to click on web. And we're going to hit white. It looks the same. Okay, so we can modify each of these format. I know it's silly stuff, but I want you to think about each of the properties, and every control is inside the properties window. There's different ways to modify the controls. I can do it in the properties window, right? I can also do it, if it's available in my properties window, it's going to be available on the code side, right? That's the other thing to think about. So if a property is available here, I can also see it somewhere else. All right, so I've got these three things done, and I've got separation. This is much tighter, the way they've described this stuff. How do I fix it? How do I make it so that it's much tighter? And I want to do it, well, there's a couple things to do, right? I could start doing one of these things. So I could kind of select all the remaining ones and pull them all up like this, right? So I could have line to 1 to the top left and pull them in so that I see what it looks like this, that way. Once I've got 2, right? An example will be if I kind of click away, these things here. So if I go like this, if I go shift click all these ones, like this, and if I want them to be like this or like this, to even, now there's an even amount of ones that are spaced out and the ones that are close. What do you think is going to happen? Are they going to space out nicely, or are they going to be closer?
It'll space out nicely, but it's going to use the bottom, your total text box.
Let's see.
Too.
Which totally messes up, right? You would expect it to do certain things, but it doesn't. I'm just putting it out there too. So if you try it out and you're like, God damn it, right? How come it did that, right? It's not because I'm trying to mess you up here. It's because some things that you think are going to work out. Remember, the top left one, subtotal, is the one that it's using as the master one. Do that change. The other thing to do is to kind of move them closer as much as you can. And if you notice, if I go like this, you can see as it goes. See, I have that little smart guide. Let's do that. Let me undo that thing again. So I kind of did this one, right? So I pulled it out so I have that little smart guide right there that comes up. There's a little thing that comes up between these two things here. Right? And the same thing with these ones, right? Snaps too, and same thing with these ones. I'm just showing you some tricks on how to do your application. So if you want to rejig the way things look all together instead of doing one at a time,
Is there a group function?
There is. We'll talk about one thing. You're way ahead of me, right? You're so good. You already know that the groups are coming, right? So I want to do this. Here's the other thing that happens. Whenever I put let's run this thing the way it is right now, okay? So I'm going to kind of click this start button, right? And when I do the start button, I want to start entering data. Now, notice again, it comes up over here. I don't want that to come up over here. I probably want it to come on over here. That's where I want my form to come in. And if I start entering data, and if I say, subtotal is 100 or 200, I can't enter because notice that it's read-only. This is good. If I press tab, 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 it'll keep tabbing across everything. Tab order, right? I can assign the tab index property a little differently. So notice that the tab index, each one of these controls, these text box controls, tab index property. So I can control the navigation between one control and the other. But oh man, look what this says. This is like this one here. The first one says that it's tab index 4. How come? Because the way I added it in. 3, 4, 5. So it starts at 0. That's the first tab index because it's like an array. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if I click on this one, this should be number 7. It ignores my labels because that's what tabbing does. In a Windows Form application, we normally don't tab to the label, right? The labels don't receive the tab, the focus. It doesn't receive focus. And that's a key point. If I want to set focus, right, to a particular label or a particular text box at runtime by using the focus method, the set focus method. We'll talk about that in a bit. All right, so navigation between labels. Now, I'm missing a couple of things, and then I'm going to put it up on GitHub, and we'll take a short break. When it comes to the buttons, right? So notice I have my buttons. Also, I got a bit more margin on my form here than I did on my example, so I'm going to kind of bring this in a little bit. So we'll kind of make it so it's a little bit nicer. So we're going to kind of adhere to the form. And also, I need a calculate button and an exit button that are kind of centered in here, right? Looks kind of centered. So I want to put a calculate button in here. It's calculate button. And I also have an exit button. So here's a couple buttons. Let's name them. So again, my calculate button. Calculate button, right? And we'll call this, we'll say calculate. I know this is very simple looking. I know it is, because it is, right? It's a very simple application. But there are plenty of places here to make mistakes, right? So that's why we're doing this together. Exit button, even for a simple application like this. I want you guys to help me out when it comes to. Okay. Yes. Upper camel case is what it's called, right? Yes. Not camel case, upper camel case for Visual Studio and Microsoft, right? Sorry. So if you did camel case like we did in JavaScript, meh, incorrect. Camel case. Yes. Yes. That's the standard that we're using here today, right? Is it the standard? If you look at the book, every coding house is going to have their own standard. Some place will say use camel case, right? Which is the first letter is lowercase and every other word is capitalized, right? Upper camel case means every word is capitalized, right? So use that method when we're together. All right. I'm being a stickler for a reason. Truly, I am. There's really a reason for this thing. You'll see. Because we don't have, as developers, we do not have flexibility. We've been told to make. We've been told to make a UI. We got to make that UI. It doesn't matter whether we think it's dumb, whether we think the naming conventions are wrong, right? I'm putting you in a bit of a box here, but there's a reason for it, because that's what we do, unfortunately. When we're in the real world, we're put in a box. We've been told to do A, B, C, and that's what we do, right? If you're on the design side, oh, you can be really creative, right? You can kind of think of different ideas. You can sketch it out. You can have nice ways of doing things, and so on. On the development side, absolutely not. You've been given a comp, right? sketch and maybe some details about how to do things, and you do what you're told to do, right? So I know it's kind of, I'm telling you these things, and you're like, oh man, that's kind of boring, right? But truthfully, what's happening is, now take a look at this. So I can move this around any way I want, these two buttons. I definitely want to make them a little bit up higher, centered, right? I can make them the same height for sure if I want. I can certainly align the centers. That's not what I want, right? Here's align, make vertical spacing equal. How do I make it so that it is aligned to the center, right? Align tops, right? Align rights, align centers, right? But I can't put it to the center. How do I calculate the center, by the way? What is the center? Very nice. So if my form, I know it sounds really dumb, but my form size is right here. Notice that it's 242 by 300, right? Notice that this form looks like it's a little wider than it is tall, right? My form looks like it's pretty tall right now. So I got to bring this in a little bit. And I don't have specifications. One thing that I'm being a little bit, off a little bit, because you know what the truth is, in real life we get everything that we see. We wouldn't just see someone's design, because then you're just guessing. I kind of guess that it's this much. No. Each one of these things would have numbers. You'd have a number here for the borders, for the margin up here, margin down there. You'd have padding numbers in here and in here, the type of typography, everything would be laid out for you. So it wouldn't be something that you would, as developers, we shouldn't be guessing. We should have a map, a blueprint, almost like we're construction people, right? You want to build a house? Right? I'll build your house. Don't tell me you kind of want a bathroom over here, right? Because that's not going to work for me as a developer. Exactly where you want your bathroom, the exact coordinates. Or I want to know what my bathroom is relative to. It's relative to the left side. 5% from the left side would be valid, right? Or 2 pixels from the left, or whatever it's going to be. You're going to get relative or absolute coordinates, right, for all your stuff in real life. Okay, but in this case, we're kind of guessing because we don't know exactly what it is, so we're kind of matching it up to what we're seeing here. There's a couple of things we can do here. If you really want to, my size is, again, if I open this up, you can see that width is the first value and height is the second value. So width is 242. I'm going to do myself a favor and make it even. If I make it even, can I really get the middle? Think about that carefully, right? If I make it 240, right? I'm just putting it this from a UI design perspective, right? That means I really have how much? I have 120 on one side, this side, and there's no pixel in the middle, right? So really, odd pixel makes it much easier for me to do it. If I made it exactly as an example, putting it out there, 241, there's that middle pixel, right? That's the center. What I want, right? So 121 would be the middle if it was 241, right? Let me show you this. So if I change this to 241, very different. There's nothing. You can't even see anything here, right? But now I know that the exact middle, if I was going to go to the middle for a second, let's put this over here for a second. If I go to the exact middle, see where this middle is, right? I could figure out where the middle is. Now here's the other question. How do I draw my objects on the screen? Are they drawn from the middle? From the bottom? Where are they drawn? All objects in most computer programs, unless otherwise told that they're different, right? The anchor point, the middle point is the top left corner, right? I know that's crazy, but that's how we do it, right? So that means the middle, if I want to kind of align to middle, right? Or if I want to put this calculate button exactly in the middle, and if I want to get the coordinates, notice that my position, see how it's 112, right? That's if we're assuming that, and here's the x coordinate. The x coordinate from the top left corner, right, is 112 this way, right? That's 112. Okay, so if I want to go to the exact middle, if we said that the form is 241, it would be 121, right? That's the way I should put it. So 121. Let's see if that looks like the middle to you, right? Can't tell. Okay, that's the one thing. So that's really the middle right there. Putting it out there so you can see how it's drawn. But I can also use my middle guide here for the middle. Notice that it's almost this one. So here's a trick if I wanted to do the middle. what if I aligned all these to the middle, right? To make them 121. Then I can align off the middle from each one of these other ones. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to kind of highlight all these. And I'm going to move these to 121. So the exact position. So here's the size. Notice if I go up, I have a location. And my location, I can't exactly do everything in here because their locations are all different. But what I could do is align the first one, right? So here's my first one. And I could move this one. Now notice it's 112. If I was to move this to 121, what does it look like? It looks like this. So that's the middle right here in terms of the form. Just putting it out there, right? So if I was going to align everything to that one, so I want to align everything vertically, right, on top of each other. So align middles. Oops, undo. I meant I want to align centers. There we go. Kind of tight on this side. Just putting it out there, right? So it's kind of tight on this side. So I wouldn't recommend change. So I kind of like where they were before, about 112. I'm just giving you some insight onto what you can do to make it more. There isn't any way, because at the end of the day, you can calculate where it is, but I can't. You notice how there isn't a guide that tells me I'm in the exact middle. It's relative to everything else. So I'm not going to tell you it's best guess, because you could certainly calculate exactly where it's going to be, but this is pretty much close to where it's going to be. 112. It should probably be over a little bit if I want to really center it. Yeah, to the right more. Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is where it is. See, this is the example. So it's not exactly where it is. So this should be over here, like you said, a little bit over, like this, almost touching, like this. No, that's what they've done. Maybe a little bit out, a little bit more, like. The button, the calculate button is not aligned, right? This end is not aligned with this end, right? So it's kind of like this. Okay, is it perfect? No, it's not. Is it kind of giving us what we want? Yeah, it kind of is, right? And we're going to use this as an example. I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. You can also nudge it with your arrow keys, right? So you can use the arrow keys to nudge it up and down. So if you want a more exact position, you can do that as well. And then move this up. Much in detail about this stuff. Is it really that exciting? Hell no. But if I give you in an exam, if I tell you I want your button to be at exactly 121 pixels, you should know where to get it and how to do it. All right. So this is the first and only time I'm going to be talking about that kind of stuff, right? Otherwise, I'm just going to be making examples that work. We've got our UI. I think this is a great place to do two things: take a break, and so we don't kill the girl, right? Because the girl's, she's bored. And then, okay, your Mac doesn't run it. Okay, well we'll have to figure it out. And then the other option is the other one I want to do is I want to put this up on GitHub so that way you guys can see what I have and you can download if you couldn't make it work like me, and go from there, right? So that's what I want to do. Let's do that now. So to do the GitHub thing, there's a couple things. If you got Visual Studio 2015 or 2013 even, or I'm going to click on Home. Remember, I've already clicked on Add to Source Control or Add to Git when I first created the project in order for me to do this, right? If you don't have these options, that might mean that in your solution, you may have to go to Solution Explorer itself. You have to right-click, and there might be an option here that says Add to Source Control. If you see an option that says Add to Source Control, please click it, because that means you haven't done that. You haven't added it in the beginning. You missed a step. However, if you do see these options in Team Explorer like this, you're good to go to start. Just make all the changes. I'm going to unclick this. I'm going to hide the properties window so you can see what I get here. I get these changes. These are all the changes that I made to my application so far, and they're all on the invoice total form. That's all I've done. A little bit of change to program.cs because I modified the name of the starting form to invoice total form, and the same thing goes with my project. So I'm going to say something like this. I'll say added basic user interface to project. That's what I'm going to put in, and click Commit All. Remember, when I make a commit, it's like I'm taking a snapshot and all my code. That's what it is. It's an application snapshot. I'm saying, okay, let's take a snapshot of my code, and I'm going to store it so I can revert if I have to one day in the future. Or I can show progression from my UI building to the next phase when I wire up everything on the back end. So let's click commit all. It's going to ask me to save. So I didn't save or build. I haven't even tested this thing yet, right? Not really. And when I'm done doing this thing, it's just doing its virtual machine dance. I'm going to go to home again. This is my second step. Then click on sync. Right? And notice that if you have Visual Studio 2015 installed with Update 3 and the GitHub extension, you'll have these three options. There's three options here. There's an option to go with Visual Studio Team Services. Please don't do that. You can go with GitHub. That's the second option. And the third option would be publish to remote repository other than GitHub, or even to GitHub. To use GitHub, or let's say Bitbucket, if you like Bitbucket more, or GitLab, or something else, right? But I want to click this one, this GitHub Get Started. I'm going to click Get Started. It's all in Visual Studio. Notice that it's pointing to me to my my home GitHub account, which is Studiopoulos, but I want it to go to Georgian College, right? Suggesting the name of my Git repository as the name of my project, which is totally correct. That's what I should do, right? So GitHub account, yours would just be the name of your account, whatever it is here. The name of your project should be right here. And then when I click publish, local repository, and push it out to my remote repository on the cloud. Remember, GitHub is a cloud-based service, right? Platform as a service. It gives you the ability for you to store files. Three main reasons to use GitHub, if I was going to ask you this on a test, like I said last week, is collaboration, which is the other one, right? I want to be able to track my changes. Those are three reasons why I want to use it. And actually, there's a fourth reason now coming up, because just yesterday, they added in project management capabilities in GitHub, trying to compete with people like Trello and Teamwork and other things, other tool sets. They're trying to wrap it all into Git, which is actually very smart to do. So now I've got it up, and for you to check that, if I was going to go up on GitHub to check it out, right? So if I say, let's go to GitHub and see that this works. Here's GitHub. And one day when it responds. And let's say if I go to Georgian, and I can see that I got COMP1004, F2016 lesson 2, that's the one right there a minute ago, and I can see all this stuff. I don't want to do it. I don't want to add a README file here. If I add a README file here, how do I, if I did that here, if I added a README file on GitHub, would my Visual Studio be able to sync up with this later on? Right? And the reason why, if I didn't pull it, that means I'm one commit ahead. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Let's try this out. So here's my README file. I could do that. I could add a README file here up on GitHub. I'm doing it on the cloud service, right? And in GitHub, notice I'm using something called Markdown. Markup, different language. When I use hashtags up on GitHub like this, it indicates that it's an H1 tag. So one single hashtag means H1 tag, H2 tag. And there's many other things you can do with Markdown. There's a whole tutorial up online if you want to look at it to see how do I learn Markdown. You can make it an entire section for your documentation. So in past classes, I used to make you do external documentation as an example with an external document. As I go forward, is that people are using Markdown to use their external documentation as opposed to, which is linked into your GitHub, which I think is what we're going to do in this class when we go to external document. The external document is going to be here on GitHub, right? So when I look at your external document, I'm going to see all your external documentation. We're going to be talking about Markdown as one thing to do here on GitHub. But for now, all I need to do is put something like this. In here, I can put something like, COMP1004, application development. I can put that in there, right? And I can do something like, at right? And we'll say assignment or lesson 2, right? Which is what it is. Okay, if I do that, and notice on the bottom here, I have I can commit this new file. It's an update to my file, right? I could certainly put my own commit message, or I can accept the default one, which is create a README file. You can click commit new file. Now I have another commit. I have a fourth commit, if you will. And now my README file kind of looks like this. README file. Oh, by the way, it also supports things like wikis, right? As well as, like I said, project management. All right, but I'm gonna have a problem now. I have a real problem. If I add a change here now, I'm gonna be a commit behind. If you want to be on track or in sync with your Visual Studio project after we've done something online, or maybe a friend of yours or your collaborator did something first, the best thing for you to do if you're working in a collaboration perspective is do a pull first. So the way you want to do is you want to go to sync, and what you want to do is you want to pull, right? If you know they've made a change, right? So I pull, and it's going to look up the pull the recent one. And if you know, if I go back to my solution, hey man, where's my README file? It's not there. Why? It's probably not relevant. So if I look, it's like right now I don't see all my files in my solution. And if I was going to right click here on my solution and then open it up in File Explorer, right? Here's my folder in File Explorer, I see the README file. The README file is not included in my project. It's something that's an external file. It's here. I pulled it down from GitHub, but it's hidden from my project view. So my project view won't see the README file, but it's here. I went to Team Explorer, I went to Home, I went to Sync, and then I clicked on Pull. All right. Here, fetch is a little bit the same. You can also do all this stuff via command line, right? If you're not happy with, let's say you're a person who doesn't like Microsoft integration with GitHub, you can certainly do everything manually if you want. I'm okay with that. GitHub and get all the things I want, I'm good to go. Questions so far about this before we stop for a break, right? So just to recap, I've created my UI. That's the first step. All of my UI controls are named appropriately. I've asked you to do that. You can use smart guides as a review to move things around so that they're aligned properly. So it's going to, they're helper, they're parts of your application that help you create your UI. Each of your application objects, whether it's the form itself or whether it's each of these objects here, they're all objects of the classes that are related to the controls. Okay, so think about them as each individual objects, which means they all have methods and they have properties. Each one of these things, right? Each one of these things have methods and properties associated with them. The thing that I want to do before we finish off is, and it'll be another commit, is I want to align my form so it doesn't pop up on the and then I swear I'll stop after this, take a break. If you go to, on the bottom of the form itself, there is the start position. I want to change my start position from my form to center screen. Start my form in the middle, and if I was to test this out, you can see now that my form will start dead center of my viewport. Okay. This, and now that I made a change, I'm going to go back to Team Explorer. Notice that I have, if I go to Home, and if I go to Changes, I'm going to have a couple of one change to my form designer. All I've done is modify the form layout, and the form layout is contained in the form designer on the side that we don't really touch. So again, I can do ways. I can do it with my visual designer, which is what I've been doing so far, or programmatically on the other side with my form designer. In this course, we're going to focus on the visual designer aspect because it's called rapid application development, right? We're not going to, for the most part. Okay, so I'm going to say I updated of main form, which is what the form is, right? And then I'm going to go sync and push. There, and now you're going to see if I go back up here, and if I refresh, you can see now I'm going to go from 4 commits to 5 commits. Questions before we stop? Yes. Name of the repository? I did it right through Visual Studio. It's built in. It chose the name as the same name as my project. repository. Why would you want to do that? I would recommend not. If you've already linked it and connected it with your Visual Studio, it would be a bad thing for you to rename, because we'd have to rename the remote link with your Visual Studio as well. Automatic, right? It's stateless. So as soon as I GitHub, Visual Studio knows nothing about it until I try and push to it again, right? So if I rename my repository, the link to my repository also gets renamed, which means I would not be connected with Visual Studio properly. I have to change my remote on the Visual Studio side. I don't recommend it. However, if you really want to and you want to break your stuff, here's how you do it, right? If you go to settings, repository name is here, you can certainly rename it, okay? I don't recommend it if you've already created a remote link, however, right? And you can also disable certain things like issues, wikis, right? The merge button. You could also take away stuff by clicking on delete this repository. There's all kinds of stuff you can do, and they're all inside the settings button. I think you know the answer to that. So the answer is yes, yes, yes. Right? You could do all that stuff, but it would be a pain in the ass. You know, the answer is. And by the way, if you're ever working for me, do it right the first time, right? Because if you do it again over and over again, that's rework, and I'm paying you to do the same thing over and over again. I can pay somebody else to do it one time. I don't want you to do it again and again. Think when you're doing stuff, so that way when we're going forward, it's once, it's done, one and done. That mentality, okay? Take that away, and I'm serious. It's a good anecdote, if you will. I don't know if you agree, Keith, but that's in the real world, we do that all the time. It's one and done. All right? If you do it multiple times, imagine if I'm a painter and I go to your house and I paint the room, and then Keith says, "Tom, you painted it the wrong color." Right? I got to do it all again. Whose cost is it? Mine or Keith's? Because I'm the contractor. So I'm not going to get paid for that again. One and done. Okay, guys? Short break, and we'll come back in like 10 or 15. Go.